Scott will take the clicker. We think about tables a lot, which feels like a weird thing to say, actually. But and also it feels like a weird thing to bring up to a stage. You think of a table as a pretty innocuous object. It's kind of generic, 4 legs and a surface. But the reason we think about tables a lot, and the reason we like tables, is not for what they are, but for what they do. And we think if you start looking at what they do, it unlocks a really interesting experience for people who seat at a table.
Yeah, thinking about the experience of a table can actually be kind of liberating. For example, what if your dining room table actually was a table saw? For example, Thanksgiving dinner might take on an entirely new sort of trajectory. Could be much quicker, a lot messier. Passing the peas is potentially deadly.
Yeah, but let's look at like a slightly more usual and slightly more mundane example. This is a cafe in Venice. Whenever I see this picture, I want to be there, including right now. I mean, I think this talk is going to be great, but who doesn't want to be at a cafe table in Venice at any moment of any day? And the thing that's really interesting about it is the table, the scale of the table is so small that you can't really have a meal at it. You just have a snack. It's for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, depending on how you roll. And it's about the people around it. And this table is another example of a table that's about the people around it. In fact, it might be the most famous table in history, Arthur's Round Table. I don't know, up for debate, but I can't think of one more famous. And the interesting thing about this is King Arthur was having trouble with his barons, as the story goes. And as it turns out, they got into a big brawl at a Yuletide feast. So I don't know what your holidays are like, but when I go home, I can kind of relate to that. His solution, though, was not to talk to them. It was to create a table that lowered the status of all the players. So he created the round table as a political tool, so his subjects wouldn't fight during the Yuletide feasts. Another table that's a more functional tool is an operating table. So it's a life or death situation. Everything about the table has to be optimized so that there's access to the table, access to the patient, the height, the surface, the shape of the table. This picture, it seems to be working well. The subject is pretty happy, happiest operating, happiest patient I've ever seen. And finally, a table can be a theatrical experience. So during wartime, multiple examples of a crate actually becoming a card table. And the more interesting thing is not that the cards at play, but actually the fact that it's a theater. It's really a stage for this card game to take place that everyone in the camp can enjoy. So even the smallest suggestion of table can create a stage for a theater.
I think so. Just backing out of the military examples, though, some classrooms can at times feel like battlefields and a little high energy. The real challenge then with designing the table is thinking about what role do you want a table to play in a creative learning environment or a creative learning experience. Sir Ken had a thought about what creativity means. It's quite a broad definition. It's a little boundless, which is great. In one sense, we think about creativity or creation, creative spaces as literally spaces that people make things. So maybe a fab lab, but literally anything, any space or opportunity really where an idea gets embodied or advanced. In particular, the advancement is important. Thinking about where do the ideas lead the students and participants, what are their next steps? And a critical role or critical aspect of designing that table or that experience is really leaving room to evolve. And I thought it was really critical to bring a picture of my dentist's office in to demonstrate that, which was, that's not my dentist's office, that's next door actually, I had that dentist earlier. The thought here though is to think about what aspects of the table, what aspects of the infrastructure do you want to leverage? And it's not necessarily just making do with what you have. That is a great approach, but actually being deliberate about the items that you are using and the implements that you are using. This seems kind of makeshift, but it's actually pretty savvy in that all you need to create this impromptu situation are 2 sawhorses because the stretcher already exists. Like knowing that infrastructure, you can already build the table and build the experience. can you leverage that in a classroom where the activity is emerging? So say there's one activity going on, how are all the participants responding, and how can you provide infrastructure that allow all those participants to engage in a different way? Some people stand, some people sit on the floor, some students are moving around and dancing, all based on the same source. And that really gets to the issue of what happens when the table disappears. What happens when the students go wandering, as in this case, off into the forest to find out what is a forest. The best table actually is a knee. In that particular case, that might not be the obvious solution when someone asks, what's the best classroom table? It's a knee. In this case, the real issue here is trying to identify what properties do you want a table to embody to facilitate an experience, not so much what's the weight, what's the height, what's the material, how big is it, does it move?
So at this point, you know that the talk is not really about tables anyway. So we think about other stuff too. And in thinking about a table as an experience, it's nice to break down into different principles or properties of what a table can do. And most what a table or any experience can do. And most interesting, I think, and most impactful is posture. So we learn a lot from our students, and in watching students, we saw that mingling was a really important thing. So for students to be able to move around and mingle with each other, they not only exchange ideas, but they exchange leadership, which is really important for us. We're from Stanford at the D School, and we teach creative thinking, and sharing ideas and leadership is really important in that. So we diminished the table to a very small square. That's a table for 4 people. In fact, a reporter came to our space and called it deliberately annoying, which kind of captures the right attitude, but we think of it as sort of confrontationally exciting. Another really easy one is orientation. So as long as you have a flexible space, you can shift orientation very easily. And you can go from a theater mode to a more intimate mode. And intimacy is really important. Being able to see other people is really important. Take a card game. You really want to know if someone's bluffing. And looking at someone can give you a lot of information about whether they're bluffing, right? The stakes might be high, pennies, quarters, dollars, depending on how you play. But equally important is to see the people around you and see how they're reacting. It gives you a much more rich experience. And this can work for a classroom as well. So students around tables can get together and have that rich experience among a broader classroom where a lecture is happening. Finally, surface is really important, and this is a prototyping room at the D School, and it's a mess as always. It's always a complete mess, except when we brought the tables in at first. We designed these tables, we thought very thoughtfully, to have a surface on top that you could take off. So it would be completely disposable. Students can muck around on it, you can take it right off, put a new top on, no problem. They came in, they were white, and people were completely frightened about, sort of cutting the cake. Nobody wanted to be the first to cut the cake. But once we scratched it, just gave it a little scratch, then it started to look like this, which actually is preferable in that situation. And surfaces can also be vertical. You don't have to think of just a table. Walls work as well.
I think the not thinking of just the table, but thinking about what's up on the walls, or rather what the ambiance is. What's the context of the space? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? In this case, the context is water. So what happens when you drop a bunch of tables in water? Mix in a little alcohol, put a bar in there, and all of a sudden you've got some pleasure resort, probably in Puerto Rico. How is water the same context, though, in the case for the fishermen? They're standing in water, too, and they're doing a different activity. But it's the challenge of the experience is thinking about how the ambiance might shape the activity. And further, for the point of how many people are engaging and to what in what regard. Is it one team that's sort of quarantining itself off in a classroom and occupying that classroom and then expanding so that they can hone in on a particular project? Have that time, have that space and opportunity to explore? Or is it ramping in as many people as you can possibly get into a space to enliven it and to create a different experience? That's really what it's all about, identifying those properties to determine what the experience is that you want. What do you want to get out of the experience? Kind of forget the table for a second. What do you want to get out of the experience? That's something we actually deal with outside of the classroom too. Somehow, I actually don't remember quite how, but we ended up running a program at the official residence of the mayor of Amsterdam's house. Has anyone been there? It's I hadn't. It's really quite nice. It's quite old, too. In any event, we showed up about 30 minutes beforehand to run a design activity that we would normally plan for weeks in a given context. So this is the room we walked into. This is the 4th ballroom on the ground floor of the mayor of Amsterdam's residence. So what table would you design for this, knowing 100 people are about to pop in there? That was the sort of abandonment of the table right there, throw it away. But thinking back into what experience do we want to create, what experience do we want to facilitate, you can quickly and very easily change some things, thinking back to Ambience, to help set the stage for that experience. Literally it was quite quiet in there, first step was to just crank up some Django Reinhardt. Why not have that going, set the stage, set the ambiance right there. As it is kind of right now, it's quite hot in that room, and there are about 120 sort of European folk who are all suited about to walk in, and it's a little toasty. So literally something as simple as cracking a window made an incredible difference in owning this experience and creating a more pleasurable and meaningful experience for people that were participating. As you can kind of see here, it got going.
And so I think we've laid out a pretty profound talk here. We started with a table. We're ending with opening a window. Okay. So yes, thank you. But there's a little more to it. I think, as you can see in this picture, these folks are really engaged. So we walked into this room, which actually had upholstery on the walls, to run a project of the likes of that prototyping table that you saw, where everything's strewn all over the place. And we were very concerned that it was going to be stuffy. With a couple changes in ambiance, we got lucky. The tables weren't bolted to the floor, so people were able to turn and face each other. Also, the density of the room was nice and high, so the energy kind of came up. And actually what happened was people wouldn't leave. We had to be kicked out, I'm proud to say, of the mayor of Amsterdam's house, which is one of the highlights of my life. It hasn't been a very interesting life, but the point of it is space can feel like a complicated thing whether you're approaching it for a classroom or you're approaching it for an office meeting. But if you think less about all the furniture and what's in there and just think about what it does, it's actually pretty simple, and you can tweak just a few properties like a host, like a good host. If you think of yourself as a host, what does a host do when the guests come over? Puts on some candles, opens the windows. So if you just tweak a few properties, you can actually create an incredibly meaningful experience for people that you bring over, and it can actually change the shape of education. Thank you.
Thank you.